Order, please. I will now call the Committee of the Whole House on Bills back to order. I will recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, with consent of the House, I wonder if they would, with agreement, go back to reconsider Bills 89 and 99 with consent of the House.
Agreed.
Is it agreed?
Agreed.
Okay.
Thank you.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, could you please call Bill number 89?
Bill number 89, the Personal Health Information Act. I now recognize the Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, thank you, and I appreciate that we have an opportunity to look at Bill 89 just now. I have circulated amendments from the Liberal caucus, and I will just tell you where they are. We'll do them in one go, I think. So it was page 2, clause 3, paragraph 3G, page 6, clause 8, page 18, clause 43, and pages 36 and 37, it relates to clause 106B. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Question?
Shall the motion carry?
No. Yes.
Motion is defeated. I now recognize the... Okay, Shall the clause carry? Shall the remaining clauses carry? Shall the title carry? Shall the bill carry? The bill is carried. I will now recognize the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Chair, could you please call Bill number 99?
Bill number 99, Conflict of Interest Act. I will now recognize the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Chair, again. The amendment we wish to move is can be found on page 14, and it's been distributed. It's clause 34, line 3. So moved, Mr. Speaker.
Question?
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 All those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? Motion is carried. Shall the clause carry? Shall the bill carry? Shall the remaining clauses carry? Shall the title carry? Shall the bill carry? The bill is carried. I will now recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could you, wish you to now rise to report progress.
All those in favor of the motion? Against? The motion is carried. The committee will now rise and report its business to the House.
Order, please. We'll call the House back to order. The Chair of the Committee of the Whole House on Bills reports.
That the Committee of the Whole has met and considered the following bills. Bills 102, 103, 108, 109, 110, 111, 112, 113, 114, 115, and 120 without amendments. Bills 89, 106, and 118, which were reported with certain amendments by the Committee on Law Amendments to the Committee of the Whole without further amendments, and Bill 99, which was reported with certain amendments by the Committee on Law Amendments with certain further amendments. And the Chairman has been instructed to recommend these bills to the favourable consideration of the House.
Order that these bills be read for a third time on a future day. I'll recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, could you please call bills for second reading?
Public bills for second reading.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, could you please call Bill number 121, Human Organ and Tissue Donation Act?
Bill number 121, the Human Organ and Tissue Donation Act. I'll recognize the Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to stand today and move second reading of Bill 181? 121. The new Human Organ and Tissue Donation Act. Mr. Speaker, today in Nova Scotia, there are 141 patients waiting for an organ transplant. Every day they wait, hoping for the good news that a donor has been found, which can be an emotionally and physically difficult time as time goes on. When the organ and tissue donation decision of a person who has died is honored, lives change. Last year, Nova Scotia had 15 organ donors and 95 tissue donors, Mr. Speaker. We know these numbers could be higher. More needs to be done to ensure that people consider the gift of life and to ensure that once that decision is made, it is acted upon when they die. This new legislation will help ensure more Nova Scotians who want to be organ and tissue donors will have their wishes honored, and those waiting for life-saving and life-enhancing donations will get them sooner. Mr. Speaker, this bill replaces the existing Human Tissues Gift Act. It modernizes the existing act, and it allows for changes that will ensure that the wishes of those who want to donate organs and tissues are considered. It will help close the gap where this doesn't happen currently by using a required referral process. This process will require that potential organ and tissue donors are referred to the province's Critical Care Organ Donation Program and the Regional Tissue Bank based at the QE2 Health Sciences Centre. The staff at the Tissue Bank and Organ Donation Program will determine whether the person may be a medically suitable donor. If so, the team will then discuss organ and tissue donation with the family or decision maker to ensure that their loved one's wishes are acted upon. This change means that people who aren't suitable donors won't needlessly be approached, while ensuring that those who are suitable donors will be considered. This approach is already being used in Cape Breton and has resulted in significant increases in referrals and actual donors. The modernization of the Act also includes the addition of common law partners to the list of eligible substitute decision makers, which ensures the rights of patients in making these types of decisions. We know that 55% of Nova Scotians have given prior consent to be donors, but our medical chart audits show that referral is often not made to the organ and tissue donation programs at the time of death, and that many more could have been referred for tissue donation last year. We know we can do better to respect people's wishes and help those Nova Scotians who are waiting on a transplant list. As a province, we are working with Canadian Blood Services and other provinces to improve organ and tissue donation across the country. The recent Living Donor Paired Exchange Program is an excellent example. Of the 141 Nova Scotians waiting for an organ transplant, 121 of those persons are waiting for a kidney. Mr. Speaker, through this act, government will require an annual report from the CEO of each district health authority and from the chief medical examiner on the number of people who may be medically suitable donors but not referred to the tissue bank and organ donation program. This information will help identify barriers to improving organ and tissue donation and help the 141 Nova Scotians on the waiting list. Mr. Speaker, we consulted Nova Scotians and those individuals and organizations directly impacted by this new act in the spring. The input received through the consultations helped inform this legislation. When we announced our consultation, many Nova Scotians were surprised to learn that although you indicate you are a donor on your health card, you may not have your wishes honored. Changes to this act mean that a donor's act of generosity will now be clearly considered as legally binding in Nova Scotia. During consultations, we also heard that people were unclear why there was a waiting list for organ donation if more than half of Nova Scotians said they were donors. Although we have some of the highest rates in the country of people willing to donate, more than half of us, only about 1 to 3% of us are actually able to donate organs based on the criteria and end-of-life circumstances required to be an organ donor. Mr. Speaker, this is consistent right across the country, and I want to ensure that Nova Scotians understand why this happens. Most often, organ donors are those who have died from a major head injury or stroke. Advancements in injury prevention, like seatbelt and helmet laws, are reducing the number of tragic deaths that occur. Mr. Speaker, that's a good thing. But it also reduces the number of eligible donors. That's why it's so important for people who are able to donate to consider it as an option, because most of us never know how we are going to die. Mr. Speaker, after this legislation was introduced, I had a number of emails, and one of the emails I had was from a woman, a mother, who had lost her son in an accident, and he had discussed with her his wishes to be an organ donor in the eventuality that anything like that ever occurred. And she told me in this email that that she had fulfilled her son's wishes, and I have to say it's one of the most moving emails I think I've ever received in my time in this legislature, Mr. Speaker. So I want to encourage all members of this House, if you haven't already done so, please consider signing your health card to become an organ donor, and I ask for your support on this very important bill. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. I'll now recognize the honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I'm certainly very pleased to be able to speak today on Bill 121, which is the Human Organ and Tissue Donation Act. And the minister has made the point quite clearly that Nova Scotians have been very generous in signing their donor cards. And in fact, we have the province with the highest participation rate in the country, with 55% of Nova Scotians signing those cards and indicating their willingness to be an organ and tissue donor, you know, at the time of their death. There seems, though, to be a big disconnect when it comes to what's happening at the hospital level or at the time of their death in terms of actually making good on their wishes, following through on their wish to help others at that time. And we know there are so many different types of transplants that can take place, so many different ways that you can benefit another person's life after you're gone, by helping with restoring eyesight, you know, certainly providing different organs that can ensure people continue to live who would otherwise not, liver transplants, lung transplants, kidney transplants, and so on. We've certainly had a lot of discussion here at the legislature over the years about Nova Scotians waiting in Ontario for lung transplants, which is where they're done. And going up there and, of course, having the cost, which is a tremendous burden, but needing to be there at the doorstep of the hospital, essentially, if an organ becomes available. And so, you know, many people's lives are hanging by a thread, waiting for those organs or tissues to be available. And what we can do as citizens is certainly to sign our donor cards, to talk to our family and our friends and raise the issue so that more people will think of it, because sometimes people just don't want to look at that, or they've overlooked it for some reason. And with just a small discussion can make all the difference. And I know at the press conference that was held to introduce this, there was a mother who spoke about her son dying in a traffic accident, and it was very sad. And she certainly did say as well, similar to the email that the minister spoke about, just how much it meant to their family to be able to follow through on their son's wishes. And although he was a very young man, and he had still spoken to his parents about his wish to help others. And I thought it certainly came through loudly that mother understood, and luckily they'd had the discussion. There was no question at the time of the tragedy that they knew what they wanted to do and what their son wanted to do. So I think it's really important that we do tell those in our family, the decision makers that would be there, so that we know that this is a way we can all help others in a time of tragedy and loss. Certainly then this bill, Bill 121, takes us to the point where there's going to be some more protocols around helping people have those wishes met. Because what's really shocking and surprising is that at the end of the day, last year, there were only 15 organ transplants, only 95 tissue donors out of all of the people who passed away last year. And again, in the context that 55% of us have indicated a willingness to be donors, in fact, a wish to be a donor. So somewhere along the line, you know, we seem to be missing the boat in terms of ensuring that those wishes are met. And I do see in going over the bill and having attended the briefing on the bill that the intent here is to have the hospital staff follow a protocol which will ensure that two things, I guess. One, that more people are approached, that we don't have people who would be good donor candidates would be able to help others, and because of some miscommunication or perhaps the medical personnel at the moment not taking the initiative, that opportunity is lost, and people's lives that could have been helped are not helped. And so with this protocol, one of the things was what the minister referred to, the annual report that she would like to see, or she's now going to require through the passage of this bill, from every DHA and from the medical examiner, actually saying in opportunities that were missed, why. You have to report back. There's an accountability mechanism in this bill that would say you've got to come back and explain to the minister why the opportunity was missed. What were the extenuating circumstances? And I think knowing that this is one of the requirements coming through with Bill 121, hospitals will respond, and the people that are frontline medical personnel will now know their responsibility, I think, more clearly and understand what needs to be done. And I thought it was interesting to note as well that before families are approached, there will be an assessment about whether an individual is a candidate. I'm not sure why the number of I think we call them eligible donors is so low. If 55% of us would like to be donors and only 1 to 3% actually meet the criteria when the time comes, that seems to be tremendously low. And I realize it has to be somebody whose diseases wouldn't affect their other organs, who are within a certain age restriction. But even at that, it seems terribly low, 1 to 3% that are actually considered eligible under the criteria that we follow. And so if that is the case, we cannot allow any of the potential donors to be overlooked, because it really means the number of potential donors is very low, and the number of people waiting, as we heard, right today is 141 Nova Scotians waiting on lists for what could be life-saving organ transplants. And so it's very important that we all, as I say, do whatever we can. And I think that there is a fair amount of hope that this act will help to strengthen the situation and actually result in more transplants taking place. Because even when the minister talked about Cape Breton already putting this protocol into place, the numbers are still pretty much single digit. It's very, very low numbers that we're getting back in terms of the number of transplants that are taking place there. So, you know, I still am left to wonder why, and I'm sure that that's why during the consultation so many people expressed almost disbelief that is a very small number of people that are being helped as a result of all of us being willing to, more than half of us being willing to help. Right now, there are 4,000 Canadians waiting for organ transplants, and often, as you know, Mr. Speaker, if there is a candidate and they have to be matched, of course, in so many ways, organs are taken and moved around the country even to help in other provinces. So it might be that there is no match in Nova Scotia, but there's a match in a neighbouring province or in Ontario. So, you know, or there's only 1 or 2 centres where those transplants are taking place, and that's where the organs would be made available. So it's important that we even think about the province and its role nationally, that there are 4,000 Canadians waiting for life-saving organ transplants. And last year, only 1,803 transplants were performed across the entire country. So, you know, we have a tremendous need. We had last year 195 Canadians who lost their lives while they were waiting on those wait lists. And so whatever we can do here in Nova Scotia, I think is important, and I think the bill is going to take us forward, at least, you know, one step forward, and that's a positive thing. I hope that it will have an effect of more people talking to their families, and I hope that as individuals we also take that message to our constituents and you know, perhaps write about it or draw attention to it so that more people will become donors and indicate their willingness to be donors. I think that's something that all of us can do in our positions as legislators, and having been made aware of it here. And again, this is something that I think creates some greater hope for Nova Scotians, for those that are waiting for transplants. And again, we've heard that in the time of loss, the actual donation of tissue and organs can be a great comfort to the families that are affected, because they know that something good has come from a tragic situation. So it actually has a benefit on both sides, Mr. Speaker, which we do think is good. We know that the Legacy of Life stakeholders had discussed legislation during their education sessions, and again, the minister had consulted with them and with others in coming forward with this. What I would be interested to know the actual feedback from the consultations. It was a question that went through my mind when we were hearing about the Act coming forward. I would like to know if there was any discussion about going any further than we've gone with this, or in any way being more proactive in terms of where we might take this legislation at some point in time. Clearly, that disconnect is so great between those whose lives are sometimes hanging by just by a thread, and the people that could be able to be donors that perhaps haven't been asked or hadn't indicated because they'd never thought of it. So I don't know if there are other more proactive methods in other places, but I wondered what the people that were consulted had said, and whether this takes it as far as they want it to go, or whether there was an indication that there could be more that they would like to see done, or they would like the government to consider more just different measures that might ensure that the 1% to 3% that are actually meeting the criteria and could be donors are actually going to be able to benefit those who need those organs and tissues so much. And I think many of us know people who may have been helped over the years with those kind of donations, and it makes a tremendous difference. I've certainly known people who've had the cornea transplants and it's restored eyesight, which is a tremendous thing in itself. And I know, again, of somebody a young person who had a liver transplant in Ontario as well, where they do children. And it's really, it's so precarious about whether or not an organ will become available that it's almost by the grace of God that, that you ever get one. So we need more families to be aware of this and more people to be approached to think about it. I hope the government will, be encouraging more social media or more outreach to make sure that people do think of that. I think although Nova Scotians in a good position at 55% of people having identified their wishes to be a donor, we could even do better. I mean, we really could, and I think most people who were asked would think about it or give it more thought than they have to date. So right now, the act that we have in place at this point in time is over 20 years old. So there was no question that this act needed to be updated. And I think it is a very good time for us to do so. I certainly support any measure that will provide, greater help and more intervention and saving lives, essentially saving lives of Nova Scotians. So, Mr. Speaker, with that, I am happy to support this bill as it goes forward to law amendments.
Thank you, honourable member. Before I recognize the next member, I'm going to take a half a minute just to read our late debate topic. Somehow it got neglected earlier, so just under Rule 5.5, the topic today is therefore be resolved, the House of Assembly acknowledge that the NDP government has allowed Nova Scotia Power to increase rates on the backs of consumers, created a less competitive business environment as a result, and coupled with their electricity tax, which will continue to increase in coming years, have made life less affordable for Nova Scotians. That was submitted by the honourable member for Dartmouth East, and it will be debated at the hour of interruption at 6 o'clock. With that, I'll recognize the honourable member for Argyll.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I'm just going to spend a few moments and maybe a couple of stories when it comes to organ donation in this province. This is a good act going forward, one that I believe needed its updating, needed more clarity around organ donation in Nova Scotia. I think still far too many people become organ donors, and even to the point where even though on your health cards or on your licenses that people would sign up as being organ donors, it seems far too many of those wishes were overturned by, of course, family members in a grieving process. Mr. Chair, I have two basic experiences when it comes to organ donation in this province, and like I said, it's something that doesn't happen enough in Nova Scotia. Again, things that we should be happening more, and not only does it require an act in this House of Assembly, but it should also come with a true a marketing plan, or the lack of it. It's an awareness issue of making people understanding that the gift of life that is given by the donation of tissue, organs, or such. Mr. Chair, the two examples that I will use are two personal experiences with this system. Number one has to do, of course, with our previous Chief of Staff, Bob Manuel. I think many of you know Bob from his time as Chief of Staff over at the PC Caucus office. Well, I think it was 9 years ago or 8 years ago, Bob, when he was the manager of the HRSDC or HRDC at that time office in Yarmouth, became gravely ill. One day he was talking about his first experience where he was walking from the post office. For those of you who know where the post office is in Yarmouth, sort of center town there. And he walked over to, I believe it was the LG Trask building, which is just over by Town Hall. And he found, even though he was a larger individual, I think we'll call him, he found that that walk really, took a lot out of him. He was a lot more tired, winded, not feeling well after that walk of probably 5-6 blocks. So it's not a very difficult. It's all in flat land. So, of course, being concerned of being probably not a super healthy individual, went to his doctor, and of course went through a battery of tests at the time. Bob found that after many tests that he had a virus, and that virus had wreaked havoc on his heart muscle. And I forget what the amount of damage that was that had happened to his heart, but he became a candidate for a transplanted heart. Now, my wife at the time was working for HRDC, so was a co-worker of Bob's, and we seemed to be well aware of the things that were going on throughout his wait. And Mr. Speaker, I remember coming to visit Bob. Bob moved closer to the city. His family, where he grew up, of course, was here in Tantallon. And he came and spent time with his father, with his brother and sister. And I remember coming to visit Bob and very, very well noticing the deterioration in Bob, how he was really starting to suffer and really starting to lose more of that heart muscle. Well, thankfully for Bob, after waiting, I forget the amount of time, and I apologize for not knowing how long he waited, but I know it was sort of in that year range, if not a little more than the year range. Bob was the recipient of a new heart. And I think many of you might remember there was a full write-up in the Chronicle Herald at the time that they followed Bob through his process, through receiving the new heart, the new life that he was able to experience, of course, with his son and his grandchildren. And the best thing that I can remember in that picture in the Chronicle Herald was the picture of him and his wife Karen just before he was going into surgery. And there was sort of that look amongst them and a final kiss. And it was one of those, even now talking about it and thinking of that picture gives me the goosebumps. And, luckily for Bob, everything went well. And already 8 years later, Bob is still a force to be reckoned with, one that put up with the trials and tribulation of working in a caucus office that I know many of the honourable members here would understand, of being a chief of staff, and one that definitely survived an ordeal. Now, don't forget, we're never out of the woods when it comes to that. Of course, Bob still takes a lot of anti-rejection drugs and many drugs in order to keep him well. And the best that I can do in this milieu, in this House of Assembly, is convey the gratitude that we all have for the work that he did for our party, and I know that he has done for the province of Nova Scotia. So with that is thank you, Bob. The second example that I can convey is with my father-in-law. My father-in-law passed away. I think we're going on 6 years, almost 7 now. Had a heart attack and passed away one evening at home, and he had signed his organ donation card and was able to donate eye tissue, the corneas of his body, and they had went to donate to somebody who did require that, and then were participated in the ceremony that's had every year for families of people that have donated tissue or donated what have you in their lives. And I know my mother-in-law and my brother-in-law did participate in all that, and got to see firsthand the good that comes with organ donation. So, Mr. Speaker, I can say this is, again, a very good act, one that I think will continue to move the issue of organ donation further in our culture. Again, it's one that we should all do, regardless of what we think or what kind of shape our bodies are in. I know many people say, well, I'm not going to give anything, there's really nothing good to give. Well, if I look at my father-in-law, who was able to give his corneas, people are able to see because he did sign that paper. So Mr. Speaker, I can say that I hope that everyone in this House has taken the opportunity to sign a piece of paper, a will, whatever you can, and make it known to your loved ones that this is your intention to donate an organ or tissue so that someone else can have the opportunity to either continue to live or truly make their lives better. So, Mr. Speaker, I know our caucus supports this bill in its path through this House of Assembly. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise today to speak on the Human Organ Tissue and Donation Act, and our critic has ably dealt with a number of the more technical issues around this. I just wanted to speak about what the issue of organ donation has meant to my family. About a decade ago, I got a call from my mother back in Ontario, and she indicated to me that my cousin's son had contracted some kind of a virus and his heart was failing. And Graham was only 19 years old, and he was going to have a heart transplant. Now, we were just about to go away on vacation, and so I was flabbergasted. Anyway, we went away, and my mother kept in touch with me. And we were about part of the way through that vacation, and we kept keeping in touch, finding out about Graham's condition. And my mother sent me a text and said, "You're not going to believe this, but Graham has had his transplant." He was going downhill that fast that he was, I guess, moved to the top of the list, and so he was able to get a heart transplant. Now, this was in Toronto, and since that time, Graham has gone on to study at community college, to take up a trade, and he's a happy young man with a great life in front of him. And so, of course, my family is very, very grateful. So earlier this year, I got a call from my mother again, and she said, "You're not going to believe this, but your cousin Pam, who is Graham's mom, has to have a heart transplant." And she has had heart issues for a number of years. And so, in fact, she was going downhill. She now has a mechanical heart, and they've had to install that. And so she has joined the 1 in 4,000 Canadians who is waiting for a transplant. And just actually, we were just in the house a day or two this session when my mother sent me another text message, and she said Pam is going in for the heart transplant today. And so, we waited with great anticipation to hear the news, and unfortunately she wasn't a complete match, and so she's back on that mechanical heart. And so now to see the government moving in this direction, to see the government doing that, anything we can do to make sure that people who want to donate will get the opportunity to donate their organs if it's an appropriate circumstance for them to donate. I'm very pleased to see. And I guess I would like to say, we're not advocating moving in the direction of presumed consent or anything like that, as we have seen some parties do elsewhere, but we would like to see additional programs highlighting the issue of organ donation. And when I say we, I'm talking about me personally. I would just like to see that maybe we encourage people more to sign those cards. I think I was 16 when I got my driver's license, and I signed that card then, and I believe that it's an important thing to do, but clearly not a whole lot of people agree with me when we have so few in terms of percentage. And so I would just like to thank the government for bringing forward this bill and encourage them to take more measures that would encourage more people to sign up as donors. Thank you.
Thank you, member. I'll now recognize the honourable member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much. It's great to have an opportunity today to speak to this bill, which is of great importance to many people, and we're hearing stories about those people that we know that have been affected or maybe are currently waiting. And I know a young lady right now who's in Ontario. She's from my area, waiting for a double lung transplant, and her time is running short. It's one of these things whereby people think about it, but they don't often act. We know that we can sign the card if we want to, but it's a tough decision for people to make personally. We think, oh, just sign it, it's that simple. Do we really know what that means? I'm not sure that we do, or when we're young, perhaps like the former member just spoke, signed that at 16. Do you really know what that means? Maybe not. But even more importantly, I've been on the other end of that. When you're sitting there, when somebody is nearing that time, and you have to consider asking them, would you like to be a donor? Would you like to commit your organs and tissues and whatever else? And it's a hard thing to do. I think that doctors and nursing staff and healthcare professionals all have a very difficult time in doing it. And part of that has been because it's not something that's generally top of mind unless we've been affected by it. And it's like cancer or one of those things. When you have a family member contract cancer and or pass away because of cancer, it generally is more on your mind. And we've promoted the eradication of cancer for many, many years. As we all know in this House, there are campaigns and so on annually and months and things like that. And it's one of those things. But organ and tissue donation is not. And that's what's good about this bill and the opportunity to speak to it and get it on the floor of this House. And hopefully there are people listening and paying attention, and maybe it'll be talk around the dinner table tonight, where families will have the opportunity to talk about it seriously and say, what do you think? You know, should we be doing this if we haven't already done it? What does it affect? Well, I don't know what the numbers are. I haven't taken the time to look up the stats. I'm sure the minister in the department probably knows what they are annually by way of both deaths and donations. And more importantly, to the numbers that they help. I don't think people realize, even when they sign the organ and tissue donation obligation for afterlife, that they realize exactly how many people you could actually help. You know, how far your tissue goes, your eyes, and every other part of you could potentially go somewhere. It's a wonderful thing, and as far as I know, and nobody's told me otherwise, once that time comes, you really don't have any use for it. So, you know, in all seriousness, it is something to consider, and I hope that people are considering it. I know that the minister probably sees on a regular basis letters from people who are awaiting donation, and what can you do to help us financially? We as members probably have all seen that. Can you make a contribution to send us to Ontario? We're going to be there for 6 months while we wait. We all know what death is like. We've experienced it in our families, I would say, most of us, and if not, we will experience it, and certainly ourselves at some point. And I hope we don't wait too long before we think about this issue and we make that decision. It's a tough one to get around, and scientifically it's a great one to make. We know with the specialties that we have today, that we have technology and physicians and all that's able to be put up in front of us, what it means, and what a great thought it would be to know that you yourself left a heart or a lung or a kidney or maybe just tissue for someone who's been burned badly, eyes and cornea and so on and so forth, to carry on to help somebody. So again, just taking those few minutes, Mr. Speaker, I would say I hope that along with this bill being passed through this House, that not only tonight's discussion is had here and then forgotten about, but there's some kind of promotion. I don't know just what that is, whether it's a campaign in schools or it's a campaign on TV or whatever it is. And there's a lot of things that we put money into, like reports and all of these different things, but we know this is real. we know that this sort of thing actually helps people. They survive and they live on, as we've heard in this House, for many, many years, and generally in good health. So I hope that we have a plan to put forward this and communicate to Nova Scotians and whomever in a way that how important it is, Mr. Speaker. And with that, I will take my seat and thank you for the opportunity, and we're going to be happy to support this bill passing through.
Thank you. Thank you, Honourable Member. I'll now recognize the Honourable Member from Preston.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to be very brief on this bill, but I think it's a very good bill, and I think the government is going in the right direction with this. And I just want to tell a couple of very short stories here that are very important to me and very important to people I know. Early in the 90s, when I was first elected here to the Nova Scotia Legislature, a very good friend of mine, Dennis Day, was diagnosed with a very serious lung problem. And he had, at that time, it was very difficult to get a lung transplant, and he had absolutely no hope of surviving unless he got the lung transplant. So the community came together and put together fundraisers and really come out in a grand fashion, actually, and supported what he was trying to do in his family. Now, Dennis was always a person that would help in the community and did a lot of things to help other people. And we went through the process, and we actually, as part of the process, one thing that he wanted people to do, not for himself, but for other people, we had a ceremony actually in the grounds here of the legislature at that time, encouraging people to sign up for organ donors, to be organ donors in this province. And actually, we had a large number of people sign up at that time. Unfortunately, to make the story short, before he could go to Toronto, he was scheduled to go. He had the finances in place and everything that he could do. He wasn't a man with a lot of money, so the fundraising was very important to him. Indeed, he passed away before we managed to get the transplant done. But it showed that how the community can come together and do this, and I think this legislation is very, very positive, and if it helps 10 people in our province over the next 10 years, it'll be well worth every minute and every effort that's put in by the government today and us as opposition supporting the bill, and also for the medical professionals that are out there and trying to ensure that people's lives are saved. And I'm going to tell you another story, a brief story too. Again, it was brought to this legislature. My son-in-law's father, who lives in Cape Breton, whom I won't name, came, and there was all kinds of serious problems with drugs. The drugs that go along with these transplants are very, very, very expensive. And most people have to have these drugs the rest of their lives, and you're talking several thousands of dollars a year, and most people don't have them covered by a drug plan. So that is a serious issue after the operation. But in this case, he went to Toronto, waited there, and through huge generosity by actually a gentleman that owned an apartment building there very next to the hospital, found out about his story and provided an apartment for him free of charge, somebody didn't even know. So there must have been some connection there with that individual and someone else that had a transplant. So he did wait there several months, and indeed did get the transplant. And as of today, and that was a number of years ago, he's still alive, although not in the best of condition today, but he's still alive. He did come back and did many things that he wished that he could do before he had the lung transplant. So it does show this does work. And there's one other one I've got to mention because I think it's very important. It's a person I do not know in this world, but I'm an avid car fanatic. And I enjoy cars. I watch all the shows and everything, but that's as far as I go. I watch the shows. And there's a very famous person, Carl Shelby, and it was on the news just the other day. And, well, actually not the news, on a car show, and they gave him 5 years to live, 30 or 35 years ago, and his heart was gone. He was a very famous person in the racing field at that time, and he had to quit that. And he was on there, and he said, well, I've had a heart transplant and 3 open heart surgeries, and I'm 89 years old. And 30 years ago, they gave me less than 5 years to live. That's where the Shelby Mustang comes from. So when you're talking about these things, and fortunately, he had the resources to have these operations and go forward. But fortunately, these things are available to people. hopefully a lot of people that need them, especially young people that can utilize this and live a long life and contribute seriously to the economy of our country and to our province. And I just want to commend the minister for bringing this forward, and indeed we will be supporting this bill, and hopefully that some Nova Scotians will benefit from this. And I can tell you in the early 90s when I realized my friend was in such a situation, I did sign a donor card, and I think that everybody should do that. If you can save one life, if 1,000 people sign, it saves one life. It's well worth it. Thank you.
Thank you, member. The honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to start out by congratulating the minister on bringing forward Bill 121. Just recently, within the last week, I was reading an article and it talked about a new transportation device they have for transporting hearts, so that indeed it is not so much about location anymore. They're actually going to be able to take a heart, if somebody's a match here in Nova Scotia, and they can transport it from BC or other parts of the country or the continent. And this is a very amazing piece of technology that has come forward, which will make transplants, again, that much more easier for people that are in dire straits, because one of the problems has been, of course, there hasn't been that many organs, and when there are, it's not always close enough that the person that requires it can obtain it. So I think this type of technology, and hopefully there will be more technology along that same lines, will be coming forward, and it will make the ability for transplants to take place that much easier. So this bill is a bill that will help a number of individuals, and could be somebody even in this House. And I've heard other members of the House talk about personal experiences, and I know that I've been a long-time believer in signing donor card for organs. 23 years ago, my 17-year-old brother got off a bus and unfortunately walked in front of a car, and he was considered to be brain dead, and he was on life support for about 5 days, and the family was there, and the decision had to come. We knew he wasn't going to get any better, and it was not any way of form to allow him to go on that way. So we made a collective decision as a family that we had to remove him from life support. But along with that decision, because of his age, we were also able to talk about donation, organ donation. And what we did as a family, we decided that that would be the type of thing that he would like, that he would enjoy. And it was a very hard time for Shirley and I, because we had just had a newborn child. She was only 3 weeks old. He had just celebrated his birthday the day before, and there was all kinds of emotions going on. But anyway, the decision was made, and the donation was made. And I recall coming home from Ontario after the funeral, and when I got home, the first thing that was in front of me was a ship-a-gift from Sears that he had sent for the newborn child. And it was a hard time for our family. But about 6 months after, we got a note in the mail. And in that note, it described how 13 families had been helped by the donations from one individual. And we'll never know who those 13 people were. But we do know that they ranged in age from 7 years old to someone that was 62. And we know that it gave them a quality of life that maybe they had not been able to enjoy prior to that. So as bad as it was to lose a brother, when you got a letter like that and you heard how somebody else at least benefited from it, and how other families were able to share their time with the people they were in love with, it made certainly a little easier the transition of losing someone. So I would say that a bill like this, the opportunity for someone to donate, is something that we should all take very seriously. It's something that we should, as members of this House, but also as parents and friends, should encourage everyone to take an opportunity to sign that card, to do that simple little thing of put your signature down there, because You may not be able to do much for yourself, but there are a lot of other people out there that you may be able to help. And after all, that's one of the reasons we were put here. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I'll take my seat.
Thank you, honourable member. I'll now recognize the honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and pleased today to rise and say a few words. Also, probably need to inform the minister and government that we're not filibustering. This is a very, very positive bill, and compliment the minister for bringing it forward. Bill 121, the Human Organ and Tissue Donation Act, because I was very surprised at the basic statistic that we just had 15 people, at least, who are organ donors, and 95 tissue donations in the province. I thought at the rate at which Nova Scotians generously signed the consent card, I thought, in fact, that we would have a much higher rate at which organs were harvested and people benefited from. There's no question that over the past 7 years of my time in office, I've had a lot of people write, call, or email advancing and asking and advocating that I, as their member, to bring this issue to the floor of the legislature. And I have on a few occasions entered a resolution encouraging Nova Scotians to make sure they do sign their consent card. But I would have to say that probably it's this issue of transplant and somebody receiving the gift of life from somebody who is not going to live is a very powerful event that happens in our communities, and some, as we know, happens within their families. A couple of incidents I know that have really made me conscious of occasionally putting a note in my newsletter encouraging constituents to look at doing this, to make sure that they have signed the documentation that will allow it. And it really has made me every year conscious of this, because I actually have one constituent who has received a second double lung transplant. And this particular family, not a well-to-do family, had to rely on a tremendous number of community fundraisers. He received his first double lung transplant in Vancouver, and he was in good health for 2 or 3 years. He has cystic fibrosis, which I was surprised that, in fact, a cystic fibrosis person would actually receive, lungs, knowing, of course, that the disease is within the body. But however, as he deteriorated from his first lung transplant, they were looking at going to Toronto for a second lung transplant. And it really grabbed hold of our community, because his sister died in grade 11 of cystic fibrosis. So for this family to again garner the strength and the community support, and it was right around the same time that the lady from the riding of Richmond received some help from the province, that this family was able to stay in Toronto and their son get a second double lung transplant. And of course, he did receive the lungs. It was very successful. He is now doing some film and artistic design work, and again, a productive Nova Scotian. So it's a wonderful story. But perhaps the most gripping of all was it was a gentleman in my riding whose lungs were destroyed over a long period of time as a worker in a meat processing plant where there was a slow ammonia leak, and he literally his lungs were destroyed. And so anyway, we again had throughout the community and through my office helped with a number of fundraisers and get all the assistance from community organizations that we could muster to keep him in Toronto waiting a double lung transplant. And actually, it was just 2 days before his double lung transplant that the team of doctors said, we really have our fingers crossed. You probably have no more than a week to live. He was at 75 pounds. Day he went into surgery, he was at 75 pounds. And I'll never forget, about 3 months later, he walked into my office 3 to 4 months later, and he just broke down in tears. He said, I have to visit as many people to thank for the gift that I received, and now to be able to once again have a hope and a dream of a length of life. So it is a wonderful gift that any of us can be a participant in if we take the time and a conscientious effort to sign our donor card. I know it's done through licensing, but I've often wondered why it wouldn't be a notation on our health card. It is on the health card? Okay, thank you. I wondered, because I remember doing this through my license, and I wasn't aware that it now is. And that's, thank you very much. We were wondering what the process is, because every Nova Scotian obviously has a health card, and that's what makes perfect sense. So the minister has informed me that is the case, but it still requires our consent. That's the big thing. So, once again, I just really wanted to convey a couple of those stories. We know that in Ontario, they've opened up the debate around the fact that, if, in fact, an NDP private members bill around the issue of presumed consent, that's where the discussion is going. And while we're not advocating that at this stage, again, it is something that is on the agenda in another jurisdiction. But so, Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to say that this is a very positive piece of legislation. Also, of course, in the announcement at the bill briefing was recognizing common law partners as a substitute decision maker, and I think expanding those that would be asked, when doctors had determined that it was a life-ending situation, that now everybody will at least be tracked to see if they've consented, and also the family, partners, and so on will be notified. And so having expanded that part of the consent is also a good step forward. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I take my place.
Thank you. I'll now recognize the honourable member for Inverness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I started thinking about a friend of mine who passed away this year, Aaron Beaton of Little Judic. Aaron was only 36. We went to school together from grade primary to 12. And Aaron was, I'm just going to share a few things about him that I remember about him. Well, actually, one thing that would be of interest to the members opposite, on his Facebook page, he had that he was a supporter of the NDP. But if and I don't know if Aaron would appreciate me saying this, but I think if we've often heard the term of a red Tory, I think Aaron was a blue NDPer. Aaron was, I think he had the best combination of brains and social skills in our class, and he was successful at everything he did. He was a very kind person. I remember we had a student come to our class, and you know how it is in a small school where you have somebody new comes in and maybe they become the target because they're different. But Erin, I remember sticking up for her, and we used to tease him about having a crush on her. But you know, that was a sign of Erin. That would have been in grade 4, of a young guy who was thoughtful of other people. And that was the case also, and I refer to him as a blue Tory, I guess, because I think he was also, he was a businessman. And he touched a lot of people. He worked for a number of businesses. One was Frito-Lay down in the valley. And then he went on to work for Molson in Newfoundland. And from there he went on to own a Tim Hortons outlet. And he was living down in the States, had a young family there. And sadly, he had a brain aneurysm, and he passed away. It was a complete shock to his family. I had 2 young children under the age of 5. And so I appreciate the privilege here to remember Erin here tonight. But Erin's family decided, when it was determined that Erin couldn't continue living any longer without the aid of medical devices, they decided that they would donate Erin's organs. And it was a very thoughtful thing to do. And we hate to lose Erin, but we know that he's in a good spot now. And in his last act on this earth, he has helped others. And we thank him for that, and we thank his family for that. So, Mr. Speaker, it has been my privilege to remember Erin Beaton tonight, and I thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Honourable Member. If I recognize the Honourable Minister, will be to close debate on Bill 121. I'll recognize the Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I really want to thank all of the members who took part in the debate on second reading on this bill. I want to say that it's been, really my privilege to be able to bring this bill forward as Minister of Health, but I have my own story I'm going to share before I close off this bill. I have a drawer in my house at home where every now and then, I look in this drawer. It's a drawer where I throw things that I intend to put in a scrapbook, but I've never gotten around to doing it. And one of the things I have there is an old Chatelaine magazine that has an article in it written by Silver Donald Cameron. And it's just a very short little article, about 2 pages long. And it's the story of my brother and his wife, who had a little boy and who at 10 months old required a kidney transplant. And they received a kidney from a family from New Brunswick who had a little 3-year-old. And that little 3-year-old's kidney one went to my nephew, and one went to another family with a young child at the IWK. My nephew today is in his early 20s, and he is our miracle kid. And I feel so strongly when I think about the gift that family in New Brunswick made to my family under the most tragic of circumstances, much like the honourable member from Cape Breton West and his family, as he spoke. I relate very much to the generosity and the compassion at such a difficult time. And annually here, families from around Nova Scotia, and in fact from the Maritimes, annually Transplant Nova Scotia does an event, and there's an evening when families who have been the benefactors of the generosity and the kindness of others, perfect strangers, get together. It's the most, it really is the most uplifting, really, evening, I think, of any events that I've ever participated in. And so with this bill, if we can improve the scenarios for other people, it is so extraordinarily important. And the last thing I want to say is, you know, we're in this chamber and sometimes it gets a little heated and we have different perspectives on so many of the issues of the day. But it's really wonderful, I think, that, you know, we can have legislation like this and our partisan points of view disappear and our humanity rises to the surface, Mr. Speaker. And I'm internally grateful for the stories that we've all shared here this evening. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Thank you, Honourable Minister. The question then is for second reading of Bill number 121. Or is the House ready for the question? The question's been called. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried.
Bill 121, an act respecting human organ and tissue donation.
Order that this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. Before I go to the Deputy Government House Leader, I'm going to recognize the Honourable Minister of Agriculture on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the gallery opposite, I would like members to give a welcome to my constituency assistant, who has worked with me for 12 years since. You may notice the halo there, but anyway, I would like members to give a warm welcome to Randy Layton, please.
Thank you. I'll now recognize the Honourable Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could you call Bill number 122, the Lobbyist Registration Act?
Bill number 122, the Lobbyist Registration Act. The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to move second reading of Bill 122. Relax. I'm not going to make a speech.
Been moved second reading on Bill number 122. Thank you. I recognize the Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I just wanted to make a few brief comments. Just for some consideration as we move forward towards law amendments and perhaps third reading on this bill. This is, I think we would all generally agree that tightening up and following some of the regulations that are mirrored, as I understand it, these would mirror regulations that are already in place federally around lobbying. And I think that makes a lot of sense. I just wanted to really flag two issues for the government's consideration, and maybe they may feel they're adequately addressed, but perhaps when the minister has time, he can certainly look at these and get back to the House. And the first one is, of course, it is required that, of course, all lobbyists be registered, and this act wouldn't change that. But I think we are all aware that there are activities defined in this new act and with these new regulations that would be considered lobbying that happen regularly here, whether that's the Taste of Nova Scotia event the other day or so forth, which under this new act would qualify as lobbying, and yet many of these organizations are not currently registered as lobbyists. And so I think that it's not just good enough to have the act there. If the intent is to have those covered, I guess there's two ways. If the intent is to have those kind of activities covered, or I mean, the Minister of Agriculture and I and a number of other members were at a breakfast by the Agriculture Federation, you know, the act, really they should be registered as lobbyists, I would suggest, under the act, and maybe under the existing act. And I'm not trying to cast dispersions on members here or on those organizations. I think it's really an education piece, that it's making those organizations aware that they would be required to do that. And so I think that you know, before we've seen some of the problems that can arise from not appropriately following regulations, and I would strongly suggest that an education piece come along with that to such organizations, especially the smaller nonprofits who may not be aware. The second element is there is a provision in this act around letter writing campaigns, and I don't have the wording in front of me right now, but it has something to do with if you encourage or your organization encourages people to write MLAs on a particular issue, that perhaps you need to register as a lobbyist. And I guess I'd like some clarity around the intent and of that at some point as we move through the process, because I think we're all aware that, you know, something will come up, let's say a school closure, well, I'll give you a perfect example where the current Minister of Education, when she was in opposition, was very involved in the Alderney School proposed closure, and she, along with others, was very successful in fighting that closure. But of course, one of the things that was done, and one of the things that was took place by the SAC at that school, in the Homan School, was to organize a letter writing campaign to school board members, MLAs, council. I was on council at the time, and even councillors were getting letters about it. And so my reading of the way the Act is currently worded is that, in fact, the Homan School would need to register as a lobbyist before they would be able to not be in violation of the Act, but could still advocate for this the writing. And so, Mr. Speaker, I really just wanted to flag those two issues for the government, because I think it's important that they're aware of those two concerns that perhaps require clarity. One of them is really just a matter of education. The other one is one that I think requires clarity. I'm sure this legislation is not aimed at the small little home and school groups or the church group or so forth that is really just trying to get their message out. I'm reasonably certain that isn't the intent, and maybe there's the need for an amendment or some clarity around that, just to make sure that we don't inadvertently have people covered by this Act that it was not intended to cover. So, Mr. Speaker, with that, those are the comments, and hopefully as the process moves forward, we'd hear back from the Minister on with a response to those. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. I'll now recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I really am not going to be up here for a long time, but I did get a phone call on this particular bill from two individuals. One was a member of the CWL, and the other was a member of a fire department. And both of them were concerned as to what effect that this bill may have on their organizations, not just their, in particular, fire departments or CWLs, but all of them. And I was hoping that during the discussions tonight that the Minister can clarify just what, if any, effect that this bill may have on those. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I'll take my seat.
Thank you. The honourable member for Inverness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And one of the items that jumped out was one of the main items that's proposed in the bill is contingency fees are to be banned. And I just want to say I think that is likely a good thing. If people are lobbying with their rate of pay being relevant to their success or lack thereof, I think that could cause some difficulties, in the sense that if people are motivated by higher amounts of money, they can be more aggressive. It could also be, well, I won't, I probably better not go into that. Yeah. But I think that's important that the bill is containing that clause, and I do look forward to hearing comments from people should people appear before law amendments. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I will take my place.
Thank you. If I recognize the Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia, it will be to close debate on Bill 122. The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia, Municipal Relations.
Yes, and thank you very much. I would like to clarify a few things for the honourable members. We've added a preamble in this that explains the role of a lobbyist, and it's very important for people in Nova Scotia to realize that lobbying is a normal part of democracy, and the Lobbyist Act encapsulates people that are paid to do this job. If 20% of what their job is to lobby, then they do need to register. People out in our communities lobby us all the time on many different things, and so any community organization, that's their job, is to make sure that their voices, we hear their voice, so they wouldn't need to register. But the public does have the right to know who is lobbying government, and so therefore we have added a part of that. And I think the word grassroots is probably what confuses people the most, but it would be an organization, it would be a lobbyist that would be using other voices to get to speak to government, but that organization now, that lobbyist needs to register so that people know who is behind any type of lobbying campaign. So it's the paid lobbyists, and just to clarify that. So your fire departments, any organization that we need to hear what they have to say, that's what we're here to do. So I think that clarifies maybe some of the concerns that people have, but if people have any other concerns that I can speak to them, please feel free to speak with me. And on that, I would like to close debate on Bill 122. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. The question then is for second reading of Bill number 122. Is the House ready for the question? Question's been called. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried.
Bill number 122, an act to amend Chapter 34 of the Acts of 2001, the Lobbyists Registration Act.
Order this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can you now call Bill number 123, the Municipal Government Act, Halifax Regional Municipality Charter?
Bill number 123, the Municipal Government Act, Halifax Regional Municipality Charter. I'll recognize the Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It is my pleasure to speak to Bill 123, Amendments to the Municipal Government Act. These amendments will help the Cape Breton Regional Municipality to deal with a pressing problem in their community. Arson in abandoned buildings has been a growing concern in CBRM in recent years. And right now, there are 700 abandoned buildings in the Cape Breton Regional Municipality. That would be 400 homes and 300 businesses. And I'm sure all members of this House are aware of the impact an abandoned home or business has on a community. Untrimmed bushes, broken windows, peeling paint, and garbage on the lawn quickly follow an owner's departure. Not only is that building an eyesore, Mr. Speaker, but that building becomes a magnet for crime. And that is what is happening in CBRM. Between January and early November, there were 130 suspicious fires in that community. Several months ago, the Cape Breton Regional Police appointed a full-time arson investigator to help deal with this problem. And they have also asked for legislative help from the province, and we are very pleased to provide that. These amendments to the Municipal Government Act will clarify that a structurally sound building can still be classified as dangerous and unsightly. They will also enhance municipal authority. Municipalities will now be better able to require that owners do basic building maintenance before a building becomes unsightly. By basic building maintenance, I mean things like repairing broken windows, trimming bushes, and cleaning up garbage. CBRM wants to stop these problems before they start. Once again, Mr. Speaker, CBRM has asked for these amendments, and I'm pleased to support them with this legislative change. I'm also proposing that these amendments be made to the HRM Charter, simply to ensure our legislation is consistent. I hope that these amendments will help CBRM curb the arson problem they have been dealing with for so many years. And with these few words, Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to move second reading for this bill.
Thank you, Minister. I'll now recognize the Honourable Member for Cape Breton South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, just a couple of comments. When you have that type of statistic that we heard from the Minister in the regional municipality or any municipality that suggests there are hundreds of buildings that are vacant, it speaks volumes about the uncertainty perhaps of the economy. I know in the Cape Breton Regional Municipality we have a number of problems concerning unsightly premises, concerning abandoned buildings, and yes, concerning the arson problems that occur when you have a lot of abandoned buildings here. So this bill I think is helpful. I think it's going to have some positive impact, I guess, in enabling the municipalities to clean up or take down some of these properties. But I notice in the Cape Breton Regional Municipality, the problem seems to be getting worse, not better, with vacant buildings, with substandard buildings, with businesses that are boarded up, and that's never a good sign. It's bad enough that we have an uncertain economy, but at least we don't have to be been looking at the results of the failed economy over the past few years by looking at these boarded up buildings. So any legislation that would strengthen that is welcome in this House. So we'll certainly be supporting this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll now recognize the honourable member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now I'm just going to take a couple of minutes on this bill. I know it's got to do with the CBRM, but I sort of favor this bill in a lot of ways. One, that it should be province-wide. Every municipality, as the former speaker from Cape Breton South just mentioned, this is not an issue just in the HRM or just in CBRM. This is an issue municipally across the province. And I know as a former councillor, I have dealt with this issue head-on, and certainly it's been an issue. We as MLAs still seem to take those calls, and people dropping in to say, what are you doing about that old building? And again, not necessarily unstructurally sound, but doesn't look real good, whether it's siding coming off or windows, doors, whatever it might be. But the most important one, and you mentioned it, Minister, was garbage. There is an awful lot of people who tend to hoard up, for whatever reason, garbage. And it may not be garbage to all of us. I forget what the saying is about garbage and somebody's treasures and all of that there. Thank you, Keith. But the treasure, the garbage, I don't understand any of that. It's garbage, it's garbage, it's garbage. But anyway, that's just my thoughts on that, Mr. Speaker. But I would like to see something by way of this province-wide to encourage all municipalities to strengthen what they're doing by way of unsightly premises. I know that they have it, but it's a long, drawn-out process to get something done, unfortunately. And perhaps there's a way through legislation, an adjustment, an amendment, whatever that might be, to encourage municipal units to give them more leverage on how to deal with the issue, because it is indeed an issue. So with those few words, Mr. Speaker, I'll thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, member. I'll recognize the honourable member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to support this bill. I think it's a good bill, and I just wanted to stand up and make a few comments on it. Prior to being re-elected to the Nova Scotia Legislature, I was on regional council in HRM for about 4 years, and part of the job, one of the jobs I had at that time, was on the Dangerous and Unsightly Premises Committee. And I can remember well going to the meetings, and the first meeting I went to, they ordered a demolition of a house. On the video that they showed, the inspector showed, looked like a pretty good house to me. But anyway, we demolished the house, and the next week, or next month, they brought back and showed us a picture where the only thing left was a cleared lot. The foundation was gone and everything. And at the time, actually the family of the individual that owned the house was in support of this happening. So it concerned me greatly, because there was, this was somebody's home, and indeed they were living in it at the time when they evicted them and ripped the building down, and there was good reason for doing that, and was the right decision to make. There was no question. But it did concern me a bit, and the only concern I have about the bill is that the municipalities can remove a property that's structurally sound, and I understand why they're doing that. I'm not opposed to that, but I would just encourage the municipalities, and I want to put on the record that as they do this process and go through the process, they keep families in mind and keep families abreast of what may happen to the building if they don't indeed look after it and make sure it's safe and secure and look proper, look great. And one other thing before I sit down I want to talk about, I remember we had an unsightly premises that everybody in a particular area in the city had a beautiful manicured lawns, and this one gentleman decided he was going to grow a natural lawn. And other than being cosmetically horrible, there was no issue with it. And at that time, the municipality really wanted to take and order this gentleman to mow his lawn, or put people in there to mow his lawn, and indeed make the property and the adjacent properties better. But at that time, they didn't have the ability to do that. This bill, from what reading the bill, I believe that bill will do that, and I think that's going to be a very positive thing long term. And there was other properties here the municipality had to, over a very long time, try to resolve the problem with them. But I think overall this bill is an enabling legislation, will enable the municipalities to move forward and indeed clean up some properties and some dangerous situations that they might not have been able to do. And overall, I believe the bill is good, and we'll be supporting the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, honourable member. I'll now recognize the honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to make a couple of comments on this bill. I certainly think it's an important thing to do. I also had the opportunity to sit on the committee for dangerous and unsightly premises, and it was often a lot of disputes among neighbours and some emotional moments, really, when properties were cited. But the one thing I wanted to mention today is really a thread or an offshoot from this issue, and it relates to environmental issues around some of the properties that are left derelict and vacant and are a blight in our different communities. I have a constituent who has been very upset about a property that is in the heart of New Glasgow. And although he lives in my constituency, he owns a home and a property in New Glasgow and is very upset about it. And it's an industrial or commercial property that has been left vacant for over 25 years, and the building just sits. And it's owned by Irving, I believe, and as the owner of that property. I believe the members from Pictou might be aware of it. It's large, it's unsightly, and the reason it sits is because the property has contamination in the soil and needs to be rectified. That problem needs to be rectified. And I think we need some more powers for the Department of Environment to not just maybe cite these properties, but actually some enforcement powers, because nothing has happened, and that issue is an impasse in that town. I think the municipal councillors have been appealed to, the Department of Environment has been appealed to, and yet that property still remains there in the middle of the town, and the issue isn't resolved, and it is unsightly. It relates to this issue because it is an unsightly and unpleasant property because it's not been kept up, and it's like these vacant businesses that were referred to in Cape Breton, where there's 300 vacant businesses and 400 homes that have been left basically just vacant and derelict in Cape Breton regional municipality. But wherever you have a significant piece of property that's left, it does devalue the properties around it. It does demoralize the people who live in the area or within sight of it, or the people who work in a town where they have to consistently go by a property that's just left in essentially an orphan property. And I know in the Auditor General's report on contaminated sites, they refer to the large number of orphan properties. Often that means the owners have just abandoned them. In the case of the property I'm mentioning in New Glasgow, we do know the owners, and they are a reputable business that we can identify and find. And certainly if the Department of Environment had the powers, I would think they would have done something to correct the situation. And I'm not 100% sure, but I believe in looking at the Act, I felt that the department does have the power to do more and could step in and help the municipality and the individuals that again are being subjected to that on a daily basis, and those that are taking it very seriously. But I would just ask today, as I am definitely supporting this Act, because this Act will help municipalities take action and rectify properties that are as I say, causing devalued properties, just a lack of community in certain areas where you've left a large number of properties that are vacant, and a hazard, as was mentioned, around the fire hazard and the hazard of vandalism. But at the same time, there is a need for the Department of Environment to work with the Department of Service Nova Scotia, I believe, on the municipal issues that come around from contaminated properties in the middle of our communities as well. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I certainly am supporting the bill, but I hope that both ministers have taken note of my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll now recognize the honourable member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a few quick comments on this bill. The minister mentioned 700 abandoned buildings, and they are abandoned, but when you look at the number of total vacancies in Cape Breton and certainly in my area, it would almost double that, because there are a lot that are actually, they're owned on the books, and you can get them in a tax sale for $1,000, but they float. So someone buys them and they don't touch them. They may renovate them or they may not. They go back in the tax sale. And then the cycle continues, and what happens, the effect of that is that a home or a property sits vacant and continues to deteriorate, and then it becomes an increasingly big problem for the CBRM, who can't afford the demolition or can't afford to deal with those things. So I think that a provincial plan and provincial assistance certainly helps. The other sort of part of this, when I talk about the vacancies in the abandoned homes, a lot of these homes are company houses, and company houses is essentially a duplex that's, in a lot of the cases in Glace Bay, they're 100, 110, 120 years old. And what happens is, on one side, there's a family or there's residents that look after it's their family home, and they look after it, and it's a great home. The other side has been left vacant and empty for 2 years, 3 years, 10 years. So obviously that brings many problems with rodents, with mold, with high grass, certainly with insulation issues. So there's the hole in the vacant side. You're essentially, that weighs in on the heating costs and the cost to heat the home. So there's significant issues. And again, the CBRM has been so strapped financially and just in terms of rules and policies to deal with these things. So I think this is a great help. The minister also mentioned arson, and that is a problem with some of these abandoned buildings, but to me that would be secondary to the issue. These derelict and abandoned homes and properties, they become drug houses, they become drug hangouts, and when people have problems with drugs, prescription pills, the heavy drugs, all they have to do is pull plywood off a window, climb into these places, and that becomes their spot to do that. So it's a very significant issue in Cape Breton with these homes and abandoned properties becoming drug houses, and I think this is a good step. The Affordable Housing Renovation Partnership has been developed to look at some of these issues and use these facilities and fix them up and renovate them so that they're usable again. So anyway, there are many issues with vacant and abandoned properties in the CBRM. We've got a lot of work to do. There's lots to be done for sure, but I just want to take these few minutes to get up and say this is certainly a good start, and I'm glad the provincial government and we are involved in this, and I applaud the minister for this bill, and thank you very much. With that, I'll take my seat. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Honourable Member. If I recognize the Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia Municipal Relations, it will be to close debate on Bill 123. The Honourable Member or Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I just would like to clarify with the member opposite that these amendments are part of the Municipal Government Act, which means that they are for the full province, and they were encapsulated too in the charter so that we have consistency. There was just a little bit of misunderstanding with the member directly opposite from me. I also wanted just to say that it was the department at Service Nova Scotia, Municipal Relations, worked with the investigator, the arson investigator in CBRM, and we were very pleased to be able to provide this amendment, which we feel is the tool that CBRM can use to help with the significant difficulties they're having with abandoned homes. So thank you very much for your comments, and I take other comments made this evening under advisement too for future legislation, but right now I would like to close debate on Bill 123. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. The question is for second reading of Bill number 123. Is the House ready for the question? Question's been called. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried.
Bill number 123, an act to amend Chapter 18 of the Acts of 1998, the Municipal Government Act, and Chapter 39 of the Acts of 2008, the Halifax Regional Municipality Charter.
Order this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Deputy Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, could you call Bill 124, the Land Surveyors Act?
Bill number 124, the Land Surveyors Act. The question's being called. Ready for the question? Okay, all those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried.
Bill number 124, an act respecting Nova Scotia land surveyors.
Order this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could you now call Bill 125, the Heritage Properties Act?
Bill number 125, the Heritage Property Act. I'll recognize the Honourable Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am rising to move second reading of Bill number 125 to amend the Heritage Property Act. And I certainly will be somewhat brief this evening, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we know that Nova Scotians, including municipalities, property owners, and developers, want the Act to change to address the current and future needs of our communities. The amendments I am proposing today are a reasonable and fair start moving in that direction. The proposed changes will protect important pieces of our past while municipalities, property owners, and developers consider new uses for heritage properties. Government also plans to revise the Act's regulations to better set out its application. We consulted with many sources of information while reviewing the Heritage Property Act. We referred to government's heritage strategy, A Treasured Past, a Precious Future, which recommends the review of the Act. We took into account the Calco report, a cross-jurisdictional review published in 2008 that validates issues with the Act itself. In late September and early October of this year, Mr. Speaker, the Department of Tourism, Culture and Heritage conducted 9 stakeholder focal groups and 3 public meetings to gather opinions from a wide range of people. We heard from property owners, we heard from developers, and Mr. Speaker, we heard from municipal representatives and advisory bodies, advocacy groups, heritage organizations, and members of the public, Mr. Speaker, from Yarmouth to Sydney. Those who could not attend the consultations were able to submit comments online or by mail. Their message was clear: put in place more protection for heritage properties and cultural landscapes. This is the same message that is reflected in related research and reports. Mr. Speaker, to increase protection for heritage properties, we're proposing amendments that focus on key areas. Once a heritage property is substantially altered or demolished, the effects are irreversible. Many people agree that a 1-year time period to consider applications for substantial alteration or demolition of a municipal registered heritage property is simply too short. In some cases, the time period expires and the property is demolished. It seems without even enough time to allow for dialogue. We are proposing that the time period for municipalities to review applications for substantial alteration or demolition be extended from 1 year to 3 years. Mr. Speaker, under the proposed amendment, municipalities, property owners, and developers will be encouraged to use the extended time period for dialogue. A longer time period coupled with mediation will allow for all parties involved to reflect carefully on their actions and to find the best solutions for the property. The heritage value, and I quote, heritage value of a property is not defined in the current Act. This leads, Mr. Speaker, to difficulty in determining which elements of a property should be preserved. In Nova Scotia, we are fortunate to have many unique heritage properties. Because a one-size-fits-all approach cannot apply to each and every one, we're proposing that the heritage value of a property be directly linked to its individual character-defining elements. Character-defining elements are the aspects of the property that make it historically significant. They can include elements of architecture or an occasion or an association with a person or an event. Providing clarity around the definition of heritage property value means that the most important parts of the property will be protected. When the heritage value of a property is known, it reinforces the reasons to celebrate its uniqueness. Substantial alterations to a heritage property include those that affect the appearance or physical makeup of the building. The current act does not define substantial alterations, and it is not clear what part of a property may be changed without compromising its heritage value. Mr. Speaker, we are adding a definition of substantial alteration linked to the property's heritage value. This change will allow heritage property owners to better manage their properties. The current act is silent on cultural landscapes in the public interiors of government-owned buildings. The amendments give these two types of heritage resources protection under the Act. By enabling their eligibility for registration, we are protecting more of Nova Scotia's heritage. In addition, Mr. Speaker, to proposing amendments to the Heritage Property Act, government intends to develop regulations that establish criteria for evaluating the heritage value of a property in consideration for designation. Mr. Speaker, we will also establish criteria for appointing members to the Advisory Council on Heritage Property, which the Advisory Council on Heritage Property reviews applications for provincial heritage property registration, as well as applications for substantial alteration and re-registration. These changes are a step in the right direction, to ensure that the Heritage Property Act is up to date and able to address Nova Scotia's unique heritage preservation needs. Of course, Mr. Speaker, these amendments will respect government's commitment to living within its means. Mr. Speaker, amending the Act and developing the regulation is part of the ongoing process of protecting heritage property in Nova Scotia. Tourism, Culture and Heritage staff will continue to evaluate the need for future changes as we go forward. I will now take my seat, Mr. Speaker, and see if there's any comments from the opposition.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. The Honourable Member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll just say a few words. We only have a couple minutes before interruption anyway. We're in favor of this legislation, and I won't try to repeat everything the minister's repeated, but I do want to say something that 2008, the member from Clayton Park and myself brought these very same amendments forward to this House. So I just wanted to point that out. So we're fully in favor. We're fully in favor of everything the minister's saying about it, and we thank him for that. So with that, I'll take my seat. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Any further speakers on the bill? I'll recognize the Honourable Member from Truro-Bible Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I know we only have a couple of minutes here, but I'm going to just start to speak to this bill, which I very much support. I'm very happy to see going through, and I rise to speak on behalf of the vital amendments to the Heritage Property Act, which I want to thank the Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage for moving the adoption of such amendments and for speaking so eloquently in support of this act. Mr. Speaker, this is a subject that's very dear to my heart, as it is to many members on both sides of this House, I know. The preservation of this province's built heritage. It's almost impossible to believe that under the provision of the Act as it now stands, that the owner of a building municipally registered that has been the pride of the citizens of the community in which it stands can, Mr. Speaker, apply to have it deregistered and a scant 12 months later bulldoze it down. So, Mr. Speaker, the town of Truro lies within the constituency that I'm proud to represent in this House. Truro boasts numerous buildings, many of them private family homes, that possess unique cultural heritage, from the architectural perspective to the historical, from the way in which they were built to the historical importance of those who previously owned them. And Mr. Speaker, I will continue to use Truro as an example of the need for this government to adopt the proposed amendments to the Heritage Property Act, because Truro possesses so many buildings